And now we want to add the fiery component to our pyrobake shader. And for this we will only use the scatter field, so we won't be working with this fire field, so just the scatter. And if I go to my bindings and go to scatter, if I turn on the scatter, go to bindings, this will now enable our bindings, and we can see that it's looking for a source volume that's named temperature. So we need to create this source volume. Now, the lazy way of doing this would be to simply drop down a name attribute from our rasterized attributes, and I could rename our volume to temperature, and I could merge these two volumes together. So I placed these both together, and I could make some changes to the scatter field like this. So let's actually set up some of these parameters for our scatter, and these are the magic numbers that I used in my experiment. So the intensity scale I set to 500, the hot core scale I set to 1500, and I set the source range from 0 to 0.15. And actually let's set the hot core scale to 1000. So this hot core scale will just make the scatter effect glow a little bit more in the center. And for the blurring options and the masking options, I'll just leave these as default and they should be fine. So let's maybe go to our camera and let's choose a frame to render here and make some tests. So I'll go to my merge node over here because this will be faster to visualize. And let's choose a different frame. So let's maybe go with this frame over here. So this will be 117 and go back to my pyrobake volume. So make sure that the render flag is set to this node. And go to render view, and I will create a render now. And so this is how it looks at the moment, and we can see that the scatter effect is kind of overtaking all of our smoke. And while I like the brightness overall, the area that this effect covers is a little bit too large. So I will stop this render and let's go back to our scene. And so this way of duplicating this already rasterized volume and just renaming it to temperature, this is kind of the lazy way of achieving this effect. So what I will do instead is, let's maybe just preview our merge node instead, and I will get rid of this extra volume. So when we rename the density to temperature and merge it back, let's remove these nodes and go back to what we had originally. And what I will do is I will take just this stream of the body particles, and I want to readjust this color, so when we rasterize these particles and create a new volume, this new volume will now become the temperature, and we can shape the temperature to be however we want through these particles over here. So over to the side, I will just drop down an attribute VOP, and I will rename this attribute VOP to create temperature. Okay. And we will bind the colors to a temperature attribute that we create. So inside, let's go ahead and I'll just grab the CD and bind export to a value that we call temperature. And let's go up a level for now, and I will just copy paste this node, this volume rasterized node, plug this here, and instead of looking for our density, we will look for temperature, and this will now create the temperature volume. And now I can merge these two nodes together, and now these form a new volume that have density and temperature, and these volumes will now go inside our pyrobake. So let's see how we can adjust this temperature in this attribute VOP. If I go back to my render, we can see that maybe inside, right inside of the trail, I like how this looks, but we want it to expand not so much further out to encapsulate the whole trail. So what we want to do is we want to fade this volume as it goes outside. So we really only want to have color more at the center of our trail. And we can also modify the temperature to fade out along the length of the trail, so towards the end, and maybe we can also make it fade a little bit towards the beginning as well. So let's go back to our scene and let's take care of this outwards fade that we were talking about first. Let's step inside the attribute VOP. Let's make some room, and we want to create a float value that we can multiply with our temperature. And let's actually turn this CD attribute into a float, so just to keep things more clean and work with floats. So I will drop down a vector to flow node, and we will just grab the first component of this vector, and you can grab any component, but this will be fine. In order to compute the distance that each point has to the center of the trail, we can do this by using our friend XYZ dist, and we will need to grab a reference to our curve. So let's go back up and let's find our curve. So over here, way back in the first lessons where we created our curve, let's grab this node, Control C, and just merge it over here. So OM for object merge, place this here, so here is our curve, and I will place this to be the second input for our attribute VOP. Okay, and so here is our curve at op input 2, and let's drop this into an XYZ distance, and let's sample the position of the points. Okay, and from here we are not actually interested where the points land on the curve. We are really interested just in the distance they have to the surface of the curve. So I can grab this distance, and if I were to drop a multiply here for our color and just plug this in, and to visualize this temperature, I will go ahead and I will also plug this temperature inside my CD attribute. Okay, so now we have a distance that goes from the position of the point to the curve, and I can now grab a fit range after the XYZ dist, and I can reverse the min and max destination. So I will set this to be 0 and this one to be 1, and as I increase the source max, we can kind of see the effect that this has. So as I increase our source max value over here, we are telling the points that they are allowed to look from the center of the curve in a radius of 2 units around this curve for the maximum distance. So as I increase this value, we increase the distance more and more. And we can see that with this method we are kind of creating this glowy center. So I will set the source max to 2 and maybe increase the source min a little bit as well. So just overall this will help just increase the contrast a little bit. So now we isolate the area where we want our temperature to be, and this will dictate our scatter volume. And the second thing we said that we were gonna do is we also want to fade this color along the length, and we can again use the age attribute for that. So let's bring a bind and let's set this to age. And let's again do the same thing here. We will fit this to its maximum value, which is going to be 1.8. And also drop down a ramp parameter from this node and set this to spline and just set this as our third input for the multiply. And let's make some room here and clean this up. So now if I go up and reset the ramp, we can now control the fade along the curve. And let's maybe reverse the ramp. And so we are fading towards the end here. And let's maybe adjust some of these keyframes. And I also maybe want to fade in the particles a little bit more for our temperature field in the beginning. So I will make a new keyframe here. And let's maybe just adjust this ramp a little bit more. And I will set this point over here. Maybe this can be Cadmol ROM. Or actually, let's set all of these first to B-spline and go to this one in the middle here, so where the peak is, and let's just set this to a Cadmol ROM. Okay, so now we isolate this part right in the center here. And let's make sure that our attribute rasterize is looking for temperature, which it is. And when we combine these two volumes, let's see what we get with our pyrobake volume. So now this is our result, and maybe this is not completely visible of the changes in the viewport. So let's go back to our camera and let's maybe make a new render and we can compare. Now unfortunately Houdini crashed and I had to restart. So I lost the previous result, but hopefully you can see now that this scatter volume is fading a lot more towards the edges of our trail. And it's more hot right in the center, and it also fades along the length of the trail. Let's maybe go back to our scene and let's choose another frame to render. Let's go to our body particles and let's choose another frame here. So maybe with the head a little bit more in front, so we can get to see a little bit of the details of the head, and go to our pyrobake. And maybe if I look at this, let's turn off the grid. Maybe I want this temperature to kind of leave this head section a little bit more untouched. So we can go to our temperature attribute over here, and maybe we can fade this in a little bit more. So right here at the head level, let's maybe drag these over a bit. Okay, and if I go back to my pyrobake, we can see that there's a bit more of a gap between the fire and the head. And we will be compositing the eyes and the mouth glow in Nuke, so we don't need to worry about that for now. And let's go to our render and create another render.